After much discussion and design changes, Joe Roberts brought the idea to one of the welders at his equipment repair shop, Leroy Lee.
I was a welder for Roberts Rocky Mountains. They got this Mazzola to build this model. It was a 9-foot model. Aaron Roberts took me up and showed it to him, and he says, "Do you think you could build a 90-foot statue from this?" And I looked at it, and I said, "Well, where's the prints and the grids?" And he said, "Well, there is none." And I said, "Could you build a 90-foot statue looking at me?" And Joe said, "No." And I said, "Well, that's what you're asking me. I never built a statue before." A couple weeks went by, and Bob Bill came into the welding shop. He had this little 10-inch statue, a ceramic statue. I said, "Well, what are you doing with that?" And he said, "Well, some lady gave it to me, and I thought maybe you'd like to see it." And I said, "Well, I've seen statues before." He started to leave, and I said, "You better take this with you. It'll get broken here." And he said, "I'll pick it up in a couple of weeks." Well, a couple of weeks went by, and one day Joe walked in, and I said, "You know, Joe, this should be the Lady of the Rockies with its hands out." And Joe said, "Well, who we get to build it?" And for the life of me, I can't believe I said it. I says, "I'll do it." Joe just stared at me, and he just walked out. And I thought, thank God he didn't believe me. So then he come back in again, and the next day, and he says, "Well, when are you going to start?" And I wasn't doing much good out there because I was walking around thinking about how I'm going to tell him I can't build this statue. So anyway, we went to the 4:30 Mass, and I looked up at the figure of Mary on the wall, and I said, "If you want me to build it, you better tell your son to show me how." And that night I come home, and I tossed and I turned, and I thought, how in the world am I going to tell him I can't build that statue? And all of a sudden it was like I watched a movie. How to draw the lines in the floor into squares, how to bend the iron. I couldn't believe it. That's how it come about.
The statue would be divided and built in 6 sections totaling more than 60 tons. Construction of the statue would take 3 years.
I would say I gave half my life to the lady. My poor wife, she calls her the other woman. She's been a big part, you know, from the beginning to when I did the prints for the lady. I mean, she worked with me on it. She was like standing behind me the whole time I was building that statue, just like Joyce was behind Bill.
When you looked at them coming up and doing what they did, and the people that volunteered, and the ladies and all that helped us, and the people that donated stuff, you just couldn't let the project go, and it was going to go. We just decided, and everybody just pitched in, and that's what we kept doing.
It was decided that the best way to bring the lady to the mountain would require airlift by helicopter. On a typically cold day in December 1985, a flight crew from the Nevada National Guard arrived in Butte to assess the feasibility of the airlift and determine whether the Sikorsky Skycrane helicopter could meet the demands of the project.
As the operations officer, I knew about the mission, and I selected the crew, and then I got busy and kind of forgot about the whole mission until I got a phone call from my pilot that I'd put on that he had not properly gotten his physical completed and was grounded. I got to bed that night about 10:30. Before I left, I tried to get all my clothing and uniforms and everything together. And then I remembered I needed money in order to be able to go. I had $6. I asked my wife, she had 10. So with $16, next morning I got up at 6, and with very little preparation, very little information, we flew to Butte in the dark, in a snowstorm.
The pilot, Comstock, asked me, he says, "How much is the heaviest piece?" And I said, 9 ton. And he said, "Ooh, boy, that's right at the limit." He said, "You don't think you can take some of that iron out of there?" And I said, "Well, I'll take out what I can."
And I'm thinking to myself, we can't pick these pieces up. This is too heavy. But maybe we'll get lucky and we won't have to take it very far. And maybe we won't have to take it very high, because altitude is really tough on a helicopter. And they pointed up to that spot where she is now. How do I tell them this can't be done? The challenges facing this project were weight and altitude, both of which the Skycrane excels at, but it's not Superman. It can't do things that it is just beyond its capability. I actually looked at the pilot's manual, because I hadn't looked at it in a long time, for this kind of altitude and so forth. It ran out. There was no chart or graph that showed what would happen at that altitude under those weights.
On December 17, 1985, the airlift began. The weight of the pieces would prove to be a major challenge for the helicopter crew and the men on the mountain.
The helicopter crew and the Lady of the Rockies crew said if anything happened at all, that we wouldn't take the piece up. So everything had to be perfect as we looked at it and they looked at it. Emotions were pretty high.
Over the next 2 days, the crew would successfully place 3 of the 6 sections.
Leroy Lee with a big smile on his face, Bill Barnes with a big smile on his face, and everybody up on the crew is smiling, George James. And everybody up here is smiling. We've got her into position and we're home free.
Day 3 of the airlift, the hand section. The aerodynamics of this piece created problems as the piece was lifted up to the mountain.
Hoot Gibson said, you know, we'd never work in the wind usually. I'd like it so we didn't have any wind today. And we were on the top of the mountain, we turned the corner, we went to the statue, it was dead calm.
As they flew the hand section over the top, we all reached up and grabbed a tagline. And I looked up and thought how beautiful them hands looked hanging down underneath that piece.
He was coming over the top of us, and pretty soon it started spinning. It got the air turbulence.
And they had ropes on them, and I looked over at the one corner, and there was ropes wrapped around one guy. He threw them off.
We were in control, but the load itself was fluctuating tremendously.
It just came out right through us, between us.
You know, it was a take your breath away moment.
And then, for me, I was at the back side of the statue, and then the hand section came flying by and just stuck on the front of the statue. Then the helicopter seemed like it was going to go into the mountain, but then it dove away from where I was. All of a sudden, I thought the whole thing was just going to crash right there on the front of the mountain.
So we all ran to the edge of the cliff, and we watched the helicopter going down the cliff, going swaying back and forth.
The ground crew on the mountain were filled with terror as they rushed to the edge of the cliff.
When the first one hit the side, everybody, their heart just dropped. They thought, my God, this is going to be the end of it.
I had my hand on the button to release it. And my first ever, if I had. That's an extreme situation. Because we were at the aircraft's absolute limits and our absolute limits. Losing that load would have been the most awful thing that ever happened to these guys.
Then he's going to drop it or he's going to set it down and smash the hands.
He managed to pull in some more power, a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and began to get the nose up, and we finally got some airspeed.
And then they were lucky to find a spot out at the airport to set it down where there couldn't have been, wasn't that much damage to that fourth section.
We couldn't go any further. If we were missing that section of the statue, that was it. We were going to have to stop. Who knew when we were going to get a helicopter back again?
The previous 2 days' excitement as this 6-year odyssey neared completion began to ebb away from the crew and was replaced with a sense of dread and the fear that years of effort were coming to an abrupt end.
That, for me, was probably the pivotal moment. And I think it's about that time people understand there was a bigger power up there than just us. And I think everybody was involved in that period. I might have had the words, but the thoughts were going through everybody else's mind that, Mary, you need to help us get this done, because we realize that we aren't in total control here.
We all came up here for our own reasons, and we're all dedicating ourselves to this project for whatever each of us has to offer. We're offering our skill, our ability that we've learned over the years, and we're offering it up that we get this project completed for the people that have involved us in this. We thank everybody here, and we thank the one up above who brought us here. And let's bring this baby home to a happy conclusion, and we need her help to do that. We got the skill, she's got to help us. So let's get her up there.
It just seemed like everybody just joined in, and everybody held hands, and Jim said a prayer. Tears were there, and emotions were very high.
And I'm telling you, I'll never forget it. It was like you threw a light switch. And we said our prayer, the wind went to 35 knots, and the rest is history.
It means a lot different to different people. They see the pictures and all the memorials in there.
To me, it's a miracle. You go back and you go through the whole thing, and it's just unreal. I mean, you cannot believe what happened up there, and why that statue's up there.
Love and faith is the two words that I have to describe it in. And I think that is so true. And it's even more true today.
Day 4 of the airlift. The face of the lady looks back at the city that had turned a promise into a reality, as it made its way to the top of the Great Divide. 6 years leading to this final moment.
As soon as I got the statue head in place, we had the topping ceremony that we gently laid down beside her.
And we put that last piece on, went down and looked up in front of it. It really made you feel good. Made your heart feel good.
Everybody was hugging everybody. It was really kind of a fulfillment for everybody's dreams and aspirations, I guess.
That was when my son asked me, Dad, what do you get paid for this project? I said, son, the night the lights are turned on.
The entire city had to be watching. I mean, it was just, there's certain things that you will never forget in your entire life, and that's certainly one of them.
So we pulled up to 12,000 feet and then came back around slowly in front of her to see her in her entirety for the first time.
To look at all the men with tears in their eyes, and after 5 years of working on it, the feeling was indescribable. I mean, it was, and then to look up at her face, I mean, I guess I can say it was the happiest day of my life.
The chopper come up and the statue turned completely 180 degrees around. Like, I was looking at the crew, and my wife was up there, and it was truly the greatest day of my life. And I still had her, and the promise was completed. I love the lady, and I love my wife, and I love the people of Butte. They're great people.
So as I started across the highway, I looked up. Bubble Bill and electricians had stayed up to put the lights on the statue. And I was crying so hard by the time I got home, my wife put my head on her lap and she kept asking me, Leroy, what's the matter? And I said, why me, Pat? Why was I chose to build this? I'm a nobody. And my wife said, when Jesus and his mother want something done, they always pick a nobody. So if anybody out there asks you people who built the Lady of the Rockies, just tell them it was a whole bunch of nobodies.
Everybody bought in. Now it's part of the community.
I think we can accomplish anything.
It's just a wonderful sight, you know.
One of the most rewarding missions that I had ever undertaken.
Couldn't think it would be done, but it is.
I was glad to be a small part of it.
And it allowed people a place to pull together.
It's in my heart, so it's hard to put it in words.
I know I look at it and it's just a statue, it's a memory.
We were all proud of each other and what each one done.
It was done out of love and faith.
Our Lady of the Rockies, a husband's promise fulfilled, a community's effort, strength, and commitment triumphant, and 30 years later, an enduring tribute stands on the mountain.